Hi everyone. I'm re-recording this webinar after suffering audio issues the first time around. It was the first time I'd done a webinar and I learned some valuable lessons. One thing is that having a good quality headset is an important tool. The other is that keeping track of and addressing the questions is an acquired skill. There was a lot going on for sure. I had listened to several other webinars and was convinced they are a really great venue for reaching out to like-minded people across the country. I think it's always fun to see what other ESL people in the field are up to, so this is my chance to tell you about some of the things that I've been doing. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share with you some of my experiences with project-based teaching. I will talk to you about some of the projects I've done, all varying in shapes and sizes. And I'll be showing you many photos of my students. I love seizing the opportunity to capture people in action, and the students also enjoy seeing themselves in the photos. I'm rarely without my camera, which has turned out to be a good thing. Now, it was no small feat sifting through the hundreds of photos, but each set reminded me of all the things that we had accomplished. And now I can put some of those pictures in front of you so that you will see the visual evidence of our projects. The triumphs and pitfalls will all be revealed. Project-based teaching has many positive benefits. One of these benefits is that students fully participate in their learning. By that, I mean that everyone has a chance to contribute right from the beginning. Project work creates a highly social atmosphere. It is an atmosphere filled with collaboration. An integral component of project-based teaching is collaboration. Here in Canada, our society encourages the success of individuals, but the society from which my students originate celebrates the accomplishments of the collective group. They are already wired, so to speak, to work well together in a group, and my students are quite comfortable assuming the various roles needed to complete our projects. And the more project work we do, the better we become at taking responsibility and achieving our goals. It really is a wonderful environment, one where learning thrives quite naturally. I also like to use projects to provide students with information to help them become more independent in their community. When we are talking about settlement in Ottawa, independence is an important factor because the students need to locate many places, such as grocery stores, banks, schools, and health centers. And they need to be comfortable finding their way and figuring out things by themselves. Project-based teaching helps to increase the students' self-confidence, and the students become more willing to venture out on their own. The purpose for me sharing my ideas with you is to provide you with some food for thought, to activate your creative juices and help you to realize the enormous potential of project-based teaching. One of the resources I use to obtain a definition and rationale is listed at the top of the screen. Following that, we can read that, according to Moss and Van Duzer, project-based teaching is an instructional approach that contextualizes learning by presenting students with problems to solve or products to develop. The rationale is as follows. Learners who practice using English in authentic situations in class are more likely to transfer the English to out-of-class situations. Project-based teaching uses a hands-on approach. The students learn English while doing. Project work attracts me for many reasons. We all work together to reach a tangible outcome. And no matter what the project, we are in it together. We all take ownership for its successes and failures. Project work also promotes active speaking. We are always talking because we have many things to figure out. I thought it might be handy to show you what steps the experts recommend are taken. They are 1. Selecting a topic, 2. Making plans and doing research, 3. Developing the product, 4. Assessment, and 5. Sharing with others. As I begin to show you photos of my students, please note that they have signed waivers allowing me to show you their photos. I will start by telling you a bit about my unique class dynamic because that will help you to understand the types of projects that we have worked on. In 2009, Ottawa began accepting Bhutanese refugees who had been in camps in Nepal for well over 20 years. Bhutan is a very small country bordered by China to the north and India to the south. These Nepali-speaking people were forced to flee during a huge civil unrest. About 8 years ago, the camps began to be dismantled, and Canada agreed to accept 6,000 people. The majority of the now 200 or so who have resettled to Ottawa live within a 10 to 15-minute walk from the school where I work. We offer a link program, and many of the new students have literacy needs. I teach foundation literacy and am extremely fortunate for many reasons. First of all, my class size is small. As you can see from the photo, there are only 8 students, and they all come to class every day of the week from 9 to 2. The class is presently comprised solely of Nepali-speaking Bhutanese refugees. Most of them are elderly and unable to read and write in their own language. They have had no formal education whatsoever. They came to Ottawa with virtually no English, although their now adult children were educated in English in the camps. This is important to mention because their children are willing and able to deal with the abundance of bureaucratic red tape, and that means that my students can focus on rebuilding their self-confidence, something that clearly dissipated the minute they landed in Ottawa. The students' well-being is of utmost concern, and I work to assess their needs to the best of my ability. I am privileged by the fact that my students and their extended families have given me the opportunity to experience, understand, and embrace their culture. They invite me to birthday celebrations, weddings, funerals, baby naming ceremonies, and various other milestones they celebrate. They have clearly endeared themselves to me. They have taught me much about a world I knew nothing about. When I started getting to know them, I discovered that when they lived in Bhutan, they had all been farmers. Many had owned animals and grown various crops. It was evident that they really missed working the land. A series of lucky strikes occurred, which led to the unfolding of my first project. In March of 2011, at the same time that I was finding out all of this new information about my students, I was also taking a curriculum development course towards my MA at Carleton U. While researching the possibilities for literacy learners, I came across project-based teaching. I was intrigued. Now, I'm no stranger to the more traditional grammar-based approaches. We do spend time working on the fundamentals of reading and writing, but now I go about it differently. I work to develop their reading and writing skills in the context of a specific theme or topic, and plan for a tangible outcome, a project. I'll talk more about how reading and writing enter into project-based teaching a bit later on. The big aha moment came about like this. One of the articles I read for my course was fascinating. It was all about project-based teaching and learning. The article was talking about the principles of project-based teaching, and one of the principles in particular resonated with me. It stated that the use of prior knowledge of the students is a valuable starting point for projects. A bell went off. I knew that my students were experts in working the land because of their farming backgrounds, and spring was approaching. I pitched to them the idea of creating a vegetable garden. I told them that I needed their help because, well, although I eat lots of vegetables, I knew nothing about growing them, and they had no experience growing things in Canada. Nonetheless, we were anxious to get started, and the journey began. I mentioned a few slides ago that the first step in project-based teaching is to choose the topic. Our topic would be the creation of a vegetable garden. There were many questions that needed answering. Perhaps the most important one was, where could we get some land to use? Our search began. My class and I walked around behind our school and noticed a small, untended patch of land beside the parking lot. Rather unruly, it was full of weeds and bushes and gravel, but we saw its potential. I got permission from the building's landlord to use this area, and the first hurdle had been jumped. We were also given the use of a small room at the back of the main building, which housed the ever so important sprinkler system. It also served as a storage place for our garden tools. Many of the tools and the hoses were donated by a coworker. Now, the land needed to be cleared. So, armed with many tools from whippersnipper to shovels and axes, we assumed our roles as laborers. It was particularly difficult for me because apparently I just didn't know how to dig properly. What happened one time wasn't captured in a photo, although the memory is forever engraved. For what seemed like an eternity, I had been furiously attacking one of the more stubbornly rooted bushes. I must have looked exasperated, because one of my students very carefully took the shovel out of my hand and, with one fell swoop at the perfect angle and with the right strength, deftly removed the bush. "Wow," I said, "that's amazing." And he looked at me as if to say, "Not really, that's just how you do it." I was in awe, as I continued to be on a regular basis, at the abilities of these individuals. To them, it's just a matter of common sense. The land is now cleared of all weeds and bushes, but what you see is dirt and gravel. Obviously, it was not conducive to growing anything, let alone anything edible. Realizing that I was in over my head, I continued to enlist support from many sources. I received advice from family, friends, the internet, but especially and conveniently from one of my co-workers, an exceptionally garden knowledgeable person. She suggested that first of all we needed to enrich the dirt by covering it with soil and compost. So off we headed to the garden center across the street. Yes, another lucky strike. We started with 4 rows. We decided to choose hardy vegetables that usually fare well in the Ottawa summer, such as tomatoes, beans, peppers, and cucumbers. One specific literacy event included copying the names of the vegetables and creating a list of what needed to be purchased. The students referred to their lists when we shopped for the plants. And soon, our garden came to life. Work began in earnest as the students set about diligently planting the vegetables. Shortly after the planting, we ran into our first problem. We discovered that something was eating our precious plants. One day, while tending to the garden, we witnessed the suspected culprit. A big, fat groundhog was lounging nearby. So we decided to build a chicken wire fence around the area. Well, that seemed to work for a few days, but we soon saw more evidence of plants being eaten. We needed to do something. But what? This was perhaps what's known as a teachable moment. I decided to teach my students a couple of new words, and those were rodent, repellent. I suggested they walk to the garden center and look for some. They practiced saying the 2 new words, preceded by "do you have?" They also copied them down on a scrap piece of paper. They were nervous about the prospect of going solo, but I encouraged them to try, and off they went. They came back a little while later, and I asked them if they had found the rodent repellent. They said to me, "No, teacher, go Walmart." Well, I laughed and told them how happy I was that they had tried, they had communicated, been understood, and received an answer. Very exciting stuff. Those teachable moments arose periodically and required flexibility and creativity. There was plenty of communication that took place during this project. We had lots of common vocabulary. "Is that a weed, Krishnamaya?" I asked. "Yes, Allison, pull it out. Put in compost." Teachers and other students were invited to look at our garden and ask my students regularly, "Is the garden good?" And they would reply with smiles on their faces, "Yes, very good. Many beans. Big tomatoes. No groundhogs." Our garden was completed by the end of the first week in June, and at the end of June, school was finished. We made plans to continue coming over the summer. I met them there once or twice a week to help water and tend to the plants, and the students created a list of each other's phone numbers and arranged to water the plants if need be. We continued to be excited at the garden's growth as the summer progressed. In July, we began harvesting the first vegetables, and by the end of the summer and well into September, we had a bounty of produce. It was amazing how far we had come. Now, before I continue, I'd like to take a quick moment to address a couple of the questions people asked during the original presentation. The first one was, how did I get the money for the supplies? Well, the funds came about in several ways. Our school does a lot of fundraising, such as rummage sales and bake sales. Much of the funds raised go toward paying for buses for field trips, but we often have a surplus, and I can put in a request to the other teachers to use some of the proceeds for our supplies. I also ask the students to contribute $5 each toward the purchasing of the vegetable plants, and I use some of my own money to cover small incidentals. There was also a question about whether attention was paid to numeracy and budgeting during this project. Numeracy and budgeting came into play when we checked out the cost of the vegetable plants and figured out how many we could get with the $5 each contributed. It was surprising to me how many of the students are remarkably savvy where money is concerned. I'll continue now by talking about accountability. In our profession, we are all fully aware of accountability, not only to our students, but also to our funders. In my case, the funders are CIC and the umbrella organization I work for, the Ottawa Community Immigrant Services Organization, OCISO. CIC likes to hear about the success stories of our students, and so do we. In my case, that may mean one of my students has gone to the Food Basics on their own to purchase some fruit, or that they have asked a perfect stranger for the time or for directions. They have used some of the language we have practiced in class, and that's a success story. So some of you may be wondering how exactly accountability can be achieved in project-based teaching. The Canadian Language Benchmarks for Literacy Learners is the standard that teachers in my program are asked to follow. So when we teachers adhere to these guidelines, we are being accountable to both the students and funders. In the CLB for Literacy Learners, the foundation level focuses on several concepts. One of these concepts is the development of pre-reading and pre-writing skills. The importance of attaching meaning to the written word is stressed. In the benchmarks document, the teacher is provided with suggestions for activities that will help the learner to understand the significance of text. And these activities and tasks involve the use of gestures and visual cues. In addition, the use of realia, which are materials that are both visual and tactile, are extremely necessary. So when we follow the guidelines recommended in the CLB for Literacy Learners, we achieve the accountability necessary to satisfy all concerned. As mentioned before, projects focus on learning while doing, and I think that this is an excellent way to build the language skills for low literacy learners. My students have not had any formal education. They are not able to employ the same strategies toward learning as those who have had some formal education. The traditional classroom setting with desks and a whiteboard is not familiar to my students, but they are very happy and excited at the prospect of learning to read and write. However, sitting still and focusing for long periods of time is difficult. They need to keep their minds and bodies active, and project-based teaching lends itself to an active learning environment. Let's look at an example of a smaller project. I spoke earlier about the importance of settlement into the community, and this is a priority in the LINK program. It is both an exciting and frightening time in their lives. Newcomers, especially refugees from a developing country, are bombarded with so many firsts. It can be extremely overwhelming. Projects can help alleviate some of the anxiety of settlement. Recognition of basic survival symbols and signs is a literacy competency in the developing phase of the foundation level. Symbols and signs can be very confusing at the best of times. What I do is begin by looking at pictures of a small number of signs. The students then practice how to say them. Following that, they copy the name of the sign beside each picture. The scaffolding of activities is essential for building on language skills. Once I am convinced that they understand, we walk about the school and the community and locate the signs. Again, we are fortunate. as the area surrounding our school is rich with signage. For this project, I took photos of the students pointing to the various signs. I then printed the pictures and they placed these in their individual workbooks. And my students were the stars of the show. Voila, a concrete outcome. Even if you don't have a camera, you can certainly copy these symbols from a book or the internet. I have done the same sort of thing with other themes such as everyday activities and ailments. And now, I'd like to mention one of the dismal project failures. All of my students live in either apartments or townhouses. They all love flowers, so I thought, perfect project. We'll grow flowers in baskets. I envisioned balconies and patios emblazoned with color. I had asked the teachers to bring in any baskets they no longer had use for, and there were enough for each student to have one. After several weeks of watching the seedlings grow bigger and stronger, we moved them outside. Unfortunately, disaster struck. Several days later, we discovered that our plants had become fried to death from the blistering sun. Oh my, we were sad. So not all projects may come up smelling like roses, or zinnias, or marigolds, as the case may be, but it was a valuable lesson, and one that we all shared. So, we picked ourselves up, dusted ourselves off, and started all over again. But this time, we planted fast-growing sunflowers in a spot directly in the ground beside the vegetables. This is the location of our new flower garden. Volunteering in the community is the next thing I'll be talking about. It's also a good idea for a project. Another way of introducing students to their community is to place them in volunteer positions. Working in an authentic environment with English-speaking people will lessen the anxiety that many newcomers have about integrating into Canadian society. It will help to dispel some of the negative assumptions that newcomers may have about our culture. To date, my class has participated in 3 volunteer opportunities. The first one was in the fall of 2011 and the winter of 2012. It was an 8-month project. We volunteered for an organization called the Good Food Box. This nonprofit organization provides local produce at wholesale prices to people in the Ottawa area. One day a month, we went to the warehouse. The location was not easy to get to by bus, so I arranged to pick up and drive the students. Once there, we helped the other volunteers to clean the boxes and place the produce inside. We were given lunch, and then at the end of our shift, we were invited to fill our bags with the leftover produce. It was a wonderful chance to engage with Canadians, keep our minds and bodies active, and feel good about our achievement. The second volunteering opportunity was a one-day project on Victoria Day last year, 2012. It was the last day of the Tulip Festival. We took public transportation to get there. When we arrived at the location, we were given T-shirts and official ID tags. We were then assigned tasks ranging from welcoming people to the Tulip Festival and giving them brochures to helping visitors make wooden tulips to paint. It was a beautiful day, filled with many chances to interact with people and enjoy one of the biggest festivals in Ottawa. Our third and latest volunteering project took place closer to home. From September 2012 to June of this year, we volunteered at the Salvation Army thrift shop. It is located across the street, so it was easy to get to, although in the midst of our harsh winters, it was sometimes a challenge. One morning each week, we walked over and settled into a familiar routine. The staff assigned us various tasks to complete. These ranged from baling specific color-tagged merchandise to organizing electronics. We really had a lot of fun. There was plenty of communication, and again, we were busy. The bonus at the end of our shift was that we could shop and buy certain items for either 50 cents or $1. A question raised by the listeners in the original presentation was whether or not the students signed waivers for the times they stepped off school property. The answer to this is no. The students, all over the age of 18, are consulted prior to planning any trips, and they are all consenting adults. Residual products are what I'll be discussing next. These projects developed from the produce our garden yielded. Last fall, we dismantled the garden. We had lots of dead plants to get rid of, so we decided to build a composter. A co-worker donated a chain link fence flanked by 2 wooden posts, and we erected it in the back corner of the garden. It was also suggested that we use the composter for putting in our fruit and vegetable scraps from our snacks and lunches as well. We got the support of the whole school and provided plastic coffee cans in some of the classrooms, the staff room, and the student kitchen. Under the sink in the kitchen, we placed a large bucket to pour the smaller cans into. After lunch each day, the class responsible for cleaning the kitchen took on the added responsibility of emptying the large bucket into the composter outside. We stopped once it became inaccessible due to the accumulation of snow. But come spring, when the snow had melted, we discovered the magic of compost. And this year, we used it to enrich our garden. The next 2 projects were really fun because they were all about eating the produce. In September, we were blessed with many tomatoes. What to do, what to do. The students had told me that chutney was a regular part of their meals, so I found a recipe for tomato chutney. There were many tasks to complete, and everyone worked busily. It was their first experience with preserving food for a long period of time. 3 weeks later, the chutney was ready, and we all enjoyed the tasty result. The winter was not kind to the garden. Our soil was pretty much ruined. The area was used as a repository for the snow from the parking lot. And when the snow melted, we discovered that tons of gravel had been dumped on our lovely soil. We raked as much of the gravel off as we could, but it still needed a heavy dose of fresh soil and compost. This winter, we plan to cover the area with a protective tarp. Anyway, in April of this year, we planted loads of radish seeds directly into the soil, and were thrilled to see amazing results. By the beginning of June, we had so many radishes, and we also had masses of radish leaves. I found a recipe on the internet for grandmother's radish leaf soup, of all things. We decided to turn it into a fundraiser and made a large quantity. The soup was sold at lunchtime and available to all students and staff. We charged $1 for a bowl, and that included a bun. There were many things to do other than the actual making of the soup. We placed notices around the school to advertise. We set up a table to sell the soup. Everyone had a responsibility. 2 students collected the money, while the others helped to serve. It was a huge success. Now, I just wanted to briefly mention how our garden expanded. The original garden was created in 2011. In the spring of 2012, many of my former students had moved on, so there were a few new students. They were also Bhutanese refugees. Students wanted to have a much bigger garden. There was land available beside our existing garden, but it needed to be cleared and covered with good soil. With some of the proceeds from our fundraising efforts, we had a truckload of soil delivered. We grew plants from seeds, and this time around made sure we introduced them to their outdoor environment slowly. We planted many of the same vegetables we had grown the year before and added many new plants. One of those vegetables was brand new to me and my students. Several tomatillo plants were given to us by one of the teachers, and they thrived beyond belief. And they were delicious. We were still picking them well into the fall and enjoyed eating them freshly picked. We found some excellent recipes, such as tomatillo salsa. This year, we planted our staple plants and cleared some additional space. We added a perennial section with sage, oregano, and rhubarb. As a special request for my students, we also planted several hot chili pepper plants. and are also trying our hand at cabbage, eggplant, and various squashes. The final thing I want to talk to you about this afternoon is something I refer to as Power Talk. Power Talk is the use of a PowerPoint presentation as a tool for the students to explain their projects. No, they don't create the PowerPoints, I do. The format is fairly straightforward. I insert photos taken during the various stages of the project. I just use one photo per page, and then I insert a simple sentence to explain the action. A typical presentation will have about 18 slides. Each student is usually responsible for explaining 2 slides. I introduce and conclude the presentation. We rehearse once or twice a day, and the students take great care to practice what they are going to say. They generally have about 1 week to practice before giving the presentation. Some of the projects that we do take place outside of the classroom, so my students are happy to be able to show and tell others what they have worked on. We have a large room we call our community room, and it can fit many students comfortably. It also has a computer with a large projector screen. For our latest presentation, I asked the other teachers to sign up for a time to come and see our presentation. We presented 3 times to classes which were grouped together in similar levels. Each presentation was an opportunity for the students to show the other students their projects. They received very positive feedback, and once again, their self-confidence gained another notch. I have also created booklets with the help of PowerPoint. They are used for reinforcement activities and also as keepsakes for the students. Several questions arose about the booklets. One person asked if I wrote the content by myself or with the students. I wrote the text in the simple present tense. The text correlated with the action in the photo. For example, winter. Winter in Ottawa is cold. We wear jackets, boots, hats, scarves, and gloves. We go outside. We make a snowman, etc. The other question was about the cost. The first 2 booklets I made, I paid for myself. And then I realized that there was a small budget I could tap into at school for color copies. So the cost of subsequent booklets did not come out of my pocket. So yes, I know I'm very fortunate for many reasons. The location at which I work has many amenities, which make it pretty easy for me to create some rather elaborate projects. Together with my students, we have worked hard to achieve successful projects. Projects take time to develop. Most of us spend much of our own time preparing lessons, and some projects take more time than others, but projects are a worthwhile endeavor, and they can be as grand as you want them to be. It all begins with a small idea. Maybe you are planning a class celebration. Perhaps you are going on an outing. Anything can be turned into a project. I'm sure some of you are already doing something similar in your classrooms all over the country. Perhaps you also have a story to tell. Why not share it with us in a webinar? Just saying. Well, my presentation is finished. I hope that I provided you with some ideas to pursue in the future. And in conclusion, project-based work takes careful thought, planning, and flexibility by the teacher. Because of the dynamic nature of this type of learning, not all problems can be anticipated. Sometimes a project will move forward in a totally different direction than originally planned. Project work is organic and unique to each class, thus making it exciting, challenging, and meaningful to adult learners. And here are 2 resources that I found useful. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.